What if the most sacred object in biblical history did not disappear by accident, but vanished in a way that history itself can no longer explain? Imagine standing before a sealed stone doorway hidden deep beneath the ruins of an ancient sanctuary. The air is still. Dust hangs motionless in the darkness. Somewhere beyond that threshold may rest a forgotten treasure, a lost relic, or perhaps nothing at all. Yet for more than 2,500 years, kings, conquerors, pilgrims, priests, explorers, and scholars have all been drawn toward the same question. Not because they knew where to look, but because they could not accept the possibility that the answer had been lost forever. The object at the center of this mystery is known as the Ark of the Covenant. According to ancient tradition, it once occupied the most sacred space in Jerusalem, hidden within the Holy of Holies at the heart of the temple. It was said to contain the tablets of the covenant, to symbolize the relationship between God and Israel, and to stand at the center of a nation's religious identity. Then, at some point in history, it vanished. The historical record grows strangely silent. No verified account describes its destruction. No archaeological discovery has confirmed its survival. No universally accepted explanation has emerged. The evidence suggests absence. The traditions suggest survival. Between those two possibilities lies one of the greatest unresolved mysteries of the ancient world. Before we ask where the Ark might be today, we must first confront a deeper question. How does an object described with such detail, protected within the holiest sanctuary of its age, disappear so completely that centuries of investigation fail to recover it? This is not merely a search for a lost artifact. It is an inquiry into the limits of memory, the fragility of history, and the enduring power of a mystery that refuses to die. To investigate the disappearance of the Ark, we must return to the world in which it was believed to stand at the center of sacred history. The landscape before us is the ancient Levant, a region of rugged hills, narrow valleys, dry riverbeds, and fortified cities built from pale limestone. Trade routes connected kingdoms, empires competed for influence, and religion shaped nearly every aspect of public life. In this world, sacred objects were not merely ceremonial possessions. They were understood as visible points of contact between the human and divine realms. The historical record places the Ark within the tradition of ancient Israel, a society whose identity was deeply connected to covenant, law, and sacred memory. According to biblical sources, the Ark accompanied the Israelites through periods of migration, warfare, and political transformation before eventually finding a permanent resting place in Jerusalem. By the time of the United Monarchy, Jerusalem had emerged as both a political capital and a religious center. There, upon Mount Moriah, a sanctuary was constructed that would become the most sacred structure in the kingdom. At its heart stood the Holy of Holies, an inner chamber separated from ordinary space by layers of increasing sanctity. Ancient tradition identifies this chamber as the final confirmed location of the Arkansas. To understand its significance, we must step into the worldview of the age. The temple was not viewed merely as a building. As powerful empires expanded across the Near East, Jerusalem found itself increasingly exposed to forces beyond its control. Thick curtains soften the light until the outside world seems to disappear entirely. Ahead, within the silence of the Holy of Holies, stands the object that would become one of history's greatest mysteries. The Ark of the Covenant is not enormous. It does not dominate the room through size. Its power comes from symbolism. Ancient descriptions portray a chest constructed from acacia wood and overlaid with pure gold, its surfaces reflecting the warm glow of oil lamps like liquid fire. Long carrying poles extend from the frame, suggesting movement, pilgrimage, and sacred journeys across forgotten landscapes. Above the chest rises its most striking feature. Two cherubim fashioned from hammered gold face one another across a narrow space. Their wings stretch outward and upward until they nearly touch, forming a symbolic throne unlike any throne occupied by an earthly king. Between those wings lies an emptiness. No statue, no image. In the religious imagination of ancient Israel, the invisible God was believed to reign from a space that could not be represented by human hands. The Ark therefore becomes a paradox rendered in gold. It is both object and symbol, presence and absence, throne and footstool, container, and mystery, the evidence cannot fully resolve these uncertainties. What remains undeniable is the visual power of the image itself, a golden chest hidden within darkness, overshadowed by wings, standing at the center of a sacred universe. And perhaps that image became so enduring precisely because one day it vanished, leaving only memory to illuminate the space where it once stood. The investigation becomes far more complicated when we arrive at the moment history and catastrophe collide. The year is 586 BCE. Jerusalem stands under siege. The armies of Babylon advance against the kingdom of Judah, and the temple that once symbolized divine protection faces a crisis unlike any it has known before. The historical record confirms the broad outline of events. The city falls. The temple is destroyed. Large portions of the population are taken into exile. Yet it is precisely at this moment that the Ark of the Covenant begins to disappear from the story. Question: what happened to the Ark during the Babylonian conquest? The evidence presents an immediate problem. Babylonian records describe captured treasures from conquered territories, yet no surviving inventory clearly identifies the Ark among the spoils. Some scholars argue that this silence suggests the Ark was removed before the city fell. Others remain unconvinced, noting that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Valuable objects may have been taken without surviving documentation. This uncertainty creates the first major conflict. Historical interpretation 1 suggests preservation. Priests or royal officials may have hidden the Ark in anticipation of invasion. Historical interpretation 2 suggests loss. The Ark may have been destroyed, looted, or melted down during the chaos of conquest. Neither position can currently be proven. The conflict extends beyond history into theology. If the Ark symbolized the covenant between God and Israel, what did its disappearance mean? Some later traditions interpreted the destruction of the temple as divine judgment. Others emphasized restoration and future hope. The difficulty with both interpretations is that they attempt to assign meaning to an event whose physical details remain obscure. The historical record shows destruction. The theological record seeks explanation. Between them lies a silence that no surviving source fully resolves. This raises a deeper question. Was the disappearance of the Ark simply one consequence of imperial warfare, or did later generations become fascinated with the mystery because the object itself had acquired a significance greater than its material existence? At this stage of the investigation, both possibilities remain open. As we continue this investigation, the trail begins to leave the realm of established history and enter a landscape preserved in fragments, traditions, and texts that exist beyond the boundaries of the biblical narrative itself. Question: did ancient sources outside the canonical scriptures preserve memories of what happened to the Ark after the fall of Jerusalem? The answer is both fascinating and complicated. One of the most frequently discussed texts appears in the second book of Maccabees, written centuries after the Babylonian destruction. According to this account, the prophet Jeremiah, foreseeing the coming disaster, removed the Ark and concealed it within a cave on a sacred mountain. The text claims that the location would remain unknown until a future restoration. Some scholars argue that this tradition may preserve an early attempt to explain the Ark's disappearance. Others remain unconvinced, noting that the account emerges long after the events it describes and cannot be treated as direct historical evidence. Another intriguing source comes from later rabbinic traditions. Certain passages suggest that priests may have hidden sacred objects in chambers beneath the temple before foreign armies arrived. The difficulty with this interpretation is that these texts often combine legal discussion, theology, and historical memory in ways that are difficult to separate. The evidence suggests that the idea of a concealed Ark was widely known, but whether it reflects historical reality remains uncertain. Beyond Jewish tradition, other narratives emerged. Ethiopian sources, particularly those associated with the Kabra Nagast, present a very different explanation. In these accounts, the Ark is said to have left Jerusalem entirely and traveled south. Supporters view the persistence of this tradition as significant. Critics point out that the textual evidence appears many centuries after the First Temple period. The strongest evidence does not confirm any single theory. Instead, it reveals something equally important. Across different regions, languages, and centuries, communities repeatedly felt compelled to explain the same absence. The historical record shows a disappearance. The hidden texts attempt to fill the silence. Yet the debate remains open. Are these traditions preserving fragments of lost history? Or are they revealing how ancient societies responded when confronted with a mystery too important to leave unanswered? At this stage of the investigation, a different question emerges. What if the significance of the Ark was never limited to its physical existence? To answer that, we must examine the symbolism surrounding the object through the lenses of history, theology, archaeology, and ancient literature. The historical evidence suggests that sacred objects in the ancient Near East often served as more than ritual artifacts. They functioned as visible expressions of invisible ideas. The Ark appears to belong to this category. Question: what did the Ark symbolize within the worldview of ancient Israel? The strongest evidence comes from its placement and design. It occupied the Holy of Holies, the most restricted space in the temple. This location alone indicates extraordinary significance. Some scholars argue that the Ark functioned as a symbolic throne. The golden cherubim positioned above it resemble imagery found throughout the ancient Near East, where winged guardians marked the presence of divine authority. Yet the comparison reveals an important difference. Unlike neighboring cultures, ancient Israel did not place a visible deity between the wings. The space remained empty. The difficulty with interpreting the Ark merely as a throne is that it was also described as containing sacred covenantal objects. This raises another layer of meaning. The Ark may have symbolized not only divine kingship, but also the relationship between God and the community bound by covenant law. Archaeological evidence cannot confirm these theological interpretations directly, but it can illuminate their cultural context. Similar sacred chests, portable shrines, and throne symbols appear across the ancient world, suggesting that the Ark participated in a broader symbolic language while expressing a distinctive theology. Ancient literary traditions add another dimension. The Ark often appears at moments of transition, crossing boundaries between wilderness and settlement, conflict and peace, movement and permanence. In symbolic terms, it functions less like a treasure and more like a point of connection between earthly history and sacred order. My reading of the evidence is that the Ark's enduring power comes from this layered identity. It was simultaneously object, symbol, memory, and theological statement. And perhaps that is why its disappearance created such a profound mystery. When the Ark vanished, people were not simply asking where a sacred artifact had gone. They were asking what had become of the meanings it carried. As with many enduring mysteries, the disappearance of the Ark eventually gave rise to interpretations that exist beyond the boundaries of mainstream historical consensus. Some were preserved in religious traditions. Others emerged from mystical speculation. A few became so influential that they continue to shape public imagination today. Question: are there explanations that challenge conventional historical assumptions while still deserving scholarly examination? One of the most controversial interpretations suggests that the Ark was intentionally hidden beneath the Temple Mount itself. According to certain rabbinic traditions, sacred objects may have been concealed in underground chambers before the Babylonian invasion. Supporters argue that this theory explains why no clear record of the Ark's capture survives. Others remain unconvinced. The difficulty with that interpretation is that no archaeological investigation has produced direct evidence confirming the existence of a hidden Ark beneath the temple complex. Political and religious sensitivities surrounding the site further complicate verification. Another debated interpretation appears within mystical traditions that viewed the Ark as more than a physical object. Some scholars of religion note that certain later writings transformed the Ark into a symbol of heavenly realities rather than an artifact awaiting recovery. In this reading, searching for the Ark becomes less important than understanding what it represented. Critics argue that such interpretations risk moving too far from the historical question itself. Yet they help explain why the Ark retained its significance even after its physical disappearance. A third interpretation concerns Ethiopia. The claim that the Ark was transported from Jerusalem and preserved elsewhere remains one of the most famous alternatives to the Temple Mount theory. Supporters point to the remarkable continuity of local traditions. Skeptics emphasize the chronological gap between the alleged events and the surviving textual evidence. The strongest evidence neither confirms nor disproves the claim. The archaeological record cannot fully answer the question. What unites all of these interpretations is not their certainty, but their response to the same historical silence. The ark disappears. The record grows quiet. Human imagination begins searching for explanations. My reading of the evidence is that these theories reveal as much about the communities that preserve them as they do about the ark itself. Yet the debate remains open, and perhaps that is precisely why the mystery continues to endure. At the center of this investigation stand two fundamentally different ways of understanding the fate of the Ark of the Covenant. Both attempt to explain the same disappearance. Both draw upon historical traditions, yet they lead to very different conclusions. Question: was the Ark preserved, or was it lost forever? The first interpretation may be called the preservation theory. According to this view, the Ark survived the Babylonian destruction because it was deliberately removed before Jerusalem fell. Supporters point to traditions found in later Jewish writings, accounts associated with Jeremiah, stories of hidden chambers beneath the Temple Mount, and the enduring Ethiopian claim that the Ark was transported beyond Judah. The strength of this interpretation lies in its ability to explain a puzzling fact. The Ark is never explicitly listed among the treasures known to have been carried away by Babylon. Some scholars argue that such an omission is significant. Others remain unconvinced. The difficulty with the preservation theory is that none of the proposed hiding places has produced direct archaeological confirmation. The strongest evidence consists of traditions, not recovered artifacts. The second interpretation is often called the loss theory. According to this view, the Ark disappeared during the destruction of Jerusalem and was either destroyed, dismantled, or absorbed into the chaos of conquest. Supporters argue that this explanation requires fewer assumptions. Ancient wars routinely resulted in the loss of sacred objects, and many artifacts of great importance vanished without leaving clear records. The strength of this position lies in its consistency with known historical patterns. Its weakness is that it cannot explain why later generations developed such persistent and widespread traditions concerning the Ark's survival. This creates an intriguing tension. One theory explains the silence of the archaeological record but struggles with the persistence of memory. The other explains the persistence of memory but struggles with the absence of physical evidence. The historical record shows uncertainty. The archaeological record remains incomplete. The debate continues because each theory resolves some questions while leaving others unanswered. And perhaps that leads us to the deepest question of all. Are we searching for the final location of the Ark, or are we trying to understand why so many civilizations refuse to believe that it could simply disappear? At this point in the investigation, we must ask a question that every historical mystery eventually confronts. What does the archaeological record actually reveal? The answer is both illuminating and frustrating. Unlike many lost artifacts, the Ark of the Covenant has never been conclusively identified in any excavation. No inscription explicitly records its final destination. No chamber has yielded an object that can be verified as the Ark itself. The archaeological record cannot currently answer the central question, yet it does provide important echoes surrounding the mystery. The strongest evidence comes not from the Ark, but from the world in which it once existed. Excavations in Jerusalem have revealed monumental structures associated with ancient Judah, remnants of fortifications, administrative buildings, ritual spaces, and material culture consistent with the biblical period. These discoveries do not prove the existence of the Ark, but they confirm the historical reality of the society that preserved traditions about it. The temple itself presents another challenge. The area traditionally associated with the first and second temples remains one of the most sensitive archaeological locations in the world. As a result, direct investigation of key areas has been limited. Some scholars argue that this restriction leaves open the possibility that significant evidence remains undiscovered. Others caution that possibility should not be confused with proof. Beyond Jerusalem, intriguing parallels appear in ancient art and literature. Reliefs from the ancient Near East depict sacred chests carried in ceremonial processions, illustrating that portable cultic objects were well known in neighboring cultures. These are not representations of the Ark, but they provide valuable cultural context. Manuscripts such as the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal how profoundly temple traditions continued to shape Jewish thought centuries after the Ark disappeared. Likewise, later inscriptions, chronicles, and pilgrimage traditions preserve memories of sacred objects no longer visible. The evidence suggests continuity of belief rather than continuity of possession. This distinction is important. Archaeology often uncovers traces of human activity. It rarely recovers the full meaning attached to those traces. My reading of the evidence is that the Ark survives archaeologically not as an object, but as a network of memories embedded in sacred places, ancient texts, and cultural traditions. Whether those memories point toward a hidden reality or a lost one remains an open question. To understand why the disappearance of the Ark became such a profound mystery, we must first understand what the Ark meant within the theological imagination of the ancient world. Modern discussions often focus on location. Ancient people were more concerned with significance. Question: why was the Ark considered so important that its absence continued to shape religious thought for centuries? The historical record suggests that the Ark occupied a unique place within the religious life of ancient Israel. Unlike idols found in many neighboring cultures, the Ark was not itself worshipped. It functioned as a sacred symbol associated with covenant, divine kingship, and the presence of a God who could not be represented through physical images. This distinction is crucial. The Ark was not understood as containing a deity. Rather, it marked the place where divine authority and human history intersected. Some scholars argue that the Ark served as a symbolic throne. The space between the cherubim represented an invisible sovereignty governing both heaven and earth. Others emphasize its covenantal role. According to biblical tradition, the tablets of the law rested within the Ark, making it a physical reminder of the relationship between God and the community. These interpretations are not mutually exclusive. In ancient thought, sacred objects often carried multiple layers of meaning simultaneously. The temple itself reflected this worldview. The Holy of Holies stood at the center of the sanctuary. The Ark stood at the center of the Holy of Holies. This arrangement suggests a theology organized around sacred proximity. The closer one moved toward the center, the closer one approached the realm of the divine. Yet a striking paradox emerges. The most sacred object was also the most inaccessible. Theological significance was expressed not through visibility, but through concealment. The difficulty with interpreting the Ark solely as a ritual artifact is that ancient texts consistently place it within a larger vision of cosmic order. It symbolized law, covenant, kingship, memory, and sacred presence all at once. My reading of the evidence is that the Ark mattered because it gave tangible form to realities that could not otherwise be seen. When it disappeared, the loss was therefore more than material. For many ancient communities, it raised a deeper question. If the symbol of divine presence is gone, what becomes of the relationship it once represented? As our investigation moves beyond texts, ruins, and competing theories, the mystery of the Ark begins to reveal a deeper dimension. Question: why do lost sacred objects exert such a powerful hold on human imagination? The answer may lie not in the object itself, but in the conditions of human existence that produced the search. The civilizations of the ancient world lived within a landscape of uncertainty. Kingdoms rose and disappeared. Cities flourished and fell into ruin. Generations inherited stories whose origins they could no longer verify. The past was never entirely accessible, yet it remained profoundly important. In such a world, sacred objects served a unique function. They connected memory to material reality. They transformed invisible beliefs into tangible forms. The Ark represented one such connection. It linked a people to their covenant, their history, and their understanding of divine order. Yet the moment it disappeared, a paradox emerged. The object that once anchored certainty became a source of uncertainty. The historical record shows absence. Human imagination responds with questions. Some scholars argue that this pattern reflects a broader feature of ancient religious thought. The sacred was often understood as something that could be approached, but never fully possessed. Temples contained inner chambers. Veils concealed holy spaces. Wisdom itself was frequently associated with hiddenness rather than complete disclosure. Within this framework, the disappearance of the Ark acquires symbolic significance even if no such symbolism was originally intended. The loss transforms the object into a mystery. The mystery invites interpretation. Interpretation sustains memory. This raises a deeper question about the limits of knowledge. Ancient people sought certainty concerning the divine, yet their traditions repeatedly emphasized boundaries that could not be crossed. The Ark itself stood within the Holy of Holies, a place defined by restricted access. Even before it vanished, it was already partially hidden. The difficulty with many modern attempts to solve the mystery is that they assume every question must ultimately yield a definitive answer. The ancient worldview was often more comfortable with ambiguity. My reading of the evidence is that the enduring fascination with the Ark reflects a tension deeply embedded within human experience. We seek permanence in a world marked by loss. We seek understanding in the presence of uncertainty. And sometimes the questions that survive longest are not the ones we can answer, but the ones that reveal the boundaries of what can be known. After following the trail through ancient texts, ruined sanctuaries, competing traditions, theological symbols, and centuries of speculation, we arrive at the point where every serious investigation must confront its final assessment. Question: what conclusion can be drawn from the evidence without exceeding what the evidence actually allows? The historical record shows that the Ark of the Covenant occupied a central place within the religious life of ancient Israel. The evidence further suggests that it was associated with the temple in Jerusalem and disappeared from the historical record sometime before or during the Babylonian destruction of the city. Beyond these points, certainty begins to fade. Archaeological evidence has not identified the Ark's final location. No excavation has produced a universally accepted candidate. No surviving text written at the time of the temple's fall explains its fate. This absence has created a vacuum filled by memory, interpretation, and tradition. Some scholars argue that the Ark survived in concealment. Others remain unconvinced and regard its destruction as the more probable outcome. The difficulty is that both positions encounter the same obstacle. Neither can be demonstrated conclusively. Yet throughout this investigation, another pattern has emerged, one that may be more revealing than any proposed destination. The Ark appears to have undergone a transformation after its disappearance. While it existed physically, it functioned as a sacred object within a specific religious system. Once it vanished, it became something larger. It became a question, a symbol, a repository for hopes, fears, and unresolved historical memory. The strongest evidence comes not from what was found, but from the extraordinary persistence of the search itself. Generation after generation continued asking where the Ark had gone, even when no definitive answer emerged. My reading of the evidence is that the greatest mystery may not be the location of the Ark, but the relationship between absence and meaning. The Ark became more influential as a missing object than it ever could have been as a recovered artifact. Historical fact tells us that it once existed. Archaeological evidence cannot yet tell us where it ended. Scholarly interpretation offers competing possibilities. Narrative reflection suggests something deeper. Perhaps the enduring power of the Ark lies in the fact that it stands at the boundary between what history remembers and what history can no longer recover. And at that boundary, the mystery remains alive. As we leave this investigation behind, the Ark of the Covenant remains where it has stood for centuries, not on a map, not inside a museum, and not within the certainty of established history, but at the intersection of evidence, memory, and unanswered questions. We began with a simple inquiry: where is the Ark today? Along the way, the question evolved. We examined the historical record. We followed the archaeological traces. We weighed competing theories. We listened to traditions preserved across continents and centuries. Yet each path ultimately led back to the same reality. The evidence suggests possibilities, but no definitive conclusion. The historical record shows a disappearance, but not an explanation. The archaeological record reveals context, but not a location. Some scholars argue for survival. Others remain unconvinced. Yet the debate remains open. This raises a final question that extends beyond the fate of a single artifact. If the Ark were discovered tomorrow, verified beyond dispute, and placed before the eyes of the world, would the mystery truly end? Or would a different mystery begin? Ancient people did not regard the Ark merely as an object. They viewed it as a symbol of covenant, sacred presence, and the meeting point between the visible and invisible worlds. Recovering the object would answer one historical question, but it could not fully recover the world that once gave it meaning. Perhaps that is why the search continues. Not because humanity is merely looking for a lost chest of gold-covered wood, but because the Ark represents something deeper, the hope that the past still contains truths waiting to be uncovered. My reading of the evidence is that the greatest historical mysteries endure not because they resist investigation, but because every answer reveals another layer beneath it. Before this chapter closes, I would like to thank all those who have joined this exploration of forgotten history. If you are a historian, archaeologist, theologian, researcher, or a careful reader of ancient texts, your perspective remains part of this ongoing inquiry. The purpose of forgotten scriptures is not to end debates, but to examine them honestly. And so we leave the final question where history itself has left it. Was the Ark truly hidden somewhere beyond our reach? Or has the search endured for so long because certain mysteries reveal more about those who seek them than about the object being sought?